All good.
All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the USD290 Board of Education meeting. It is February 22nd, 2021 at 7 p.m. We'll call this meeting to order. Roll call, please raise your hand when your name is called and say present. Linda Alderman.
Present.
Chris Cunningham.
Present.
Julie D'Andrio, present. Susan Moore is not here this evening. Shanta Olmsted is not here this evening. Melidia Payne.
Here.
Harold Wingert.
Present.
So we will go ahead and start this meeting with 5 board members present. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Is there a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So move.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hand. That passes 5-0. On the consent agenda tonight, we have only our MOU with NCCC, which we have looked at before. Is there someone that would like to make a motion that we approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes 5-0 as well. We do not have any comments from the public. We do need to have an executive session tonight for the purposes of consultation with our attorney. We need to invite Dr. Cobbs and also our attorney to join us in that, and we will probably need about 20 minutes.
Think so.
Yeah. So if somebody would like to read the recommended action statement.
Madam President, I move that the board go into executive session for the purpose of consultation with an attorney pursuant to the exception for matters which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship under COMA, and that the board return to the open meeting at 7:25.
Yep.
7:25 in this room. The executive session is required to protect attorney-client privilege and the public interest, and I also would like to include Dr. Cobbs and Mike Norris.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hand. That passes 5-0, and we will return at 7:25. Good? All right, we are back from executive session. If somebody would like to make a motion that we return to regular session?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes 6-0, as Shanda Olmsted has joined us here for the rest of the meeting. Up next, we have some information coming to us from Mrs. Bybee. She's going to give us some current information on current interventions that are happening within our district. Welcome.
Well, thank you. So this is an update on our instructional software. I had, in the fall, talked with you about some of the new instructional software that we had for our teachers. And just before I get started, wanted to remind you of really how we have used instructional software in the past. We maybe purchased as a resource, but we weren't necessarily being intentional about its use. So really this year, the last few years, but specifically this year with these new programs, we have really tried to make sure that our teachers understand how to use the instructional software, how they can use the data that it gives them to be able to help guide or change their instruction that they may be having in their classroom, and looking at any growth that comes from that. So that's a little bit of an update there for kind of our background, where we came from. So the first one I want to highlight is our Lexia Core 5. This one is one that we purchased just for our K-2 students, and then we have some also for our students who are in the SPED program, 3 through 5. And it is used it's used as a core supplement, but also as an intervention. It's definitely a strong, as we've used it, love it. It's a strong program that is very explicit. It's very systematic, and it very well could be used as an intervention. So what it does is it places kids where they are as far as their skills go, and then it moves them through levels with the goal of making sure that they have reached all of their grade level goals by the end of the year. So the data will tell the teachers how much the student make a recommended time usage goal that they would have, that if they meet their goal of time usage, it should help them to meet their goals as far as how the units are presented to them. The great thing about it, at first we heard some teachers say, oh gosh, our kids don't really like it. Well, the reason they don't like it is they can't click through it. So if they're clicking through it, it senses that it means, oh my goodness, you must not understand this, and it will take them back to a teaching piece, and they'll, oh gosh, I have to do this again. So we've really talked with kids about, okay, really listen to what it's asking you to do. Really listen for those specific sounds it's asking you to identify. So it's been fun to see the progress in that. We've had professional development for our teachers. The data is compiled. This is something that I have not been able to do before, just time-wise. So Mr. Carlson is doing weekly, gathers the data for teachers and for the principals, and he gives that out to them to monitor both the usage and how many completed units students have had. So that's really kind of lit a fire under all of our teachers to be able to, hey, we need to see if this is a valuable program. The only way we can determine that is if it's being used, so we can see the data that comes from it. But our FastBridge data is reflecting for those teachers who are using it routinely and our kids who are meeting their usage minutes and meeting their units. There is data that's showing that. So I highlighted just a couple. To show this data, it's more than just giving an overall view. I really had to pare down into a teacher's classroom. So I had one that's a second grade teacher who is using it very intentionally, the way it's expected to be used. Her students scored, and her students who were scoring in the low risk, which low risk makes it sound like they still have a risk, but as far as FastBridge is concerned, that's at benchmark. And so her students increased from 75 to 88% in auto reading, which auto reading is the subtest that would be doing those specific foundational skills that kids would be practicing on Lexia Core 5. One of our first grade teachers, she saw significant growth in her students. Man, some of them even went 5 RIT bands in MAP in the foundational skills and vocabulary use of functions. And so this is a report we received from Lexia Core 5. The first 2 graphs are all of our students. So whether they met their meeting usage, their meeting goal, or their usage goal or not, Our students have, we have increased our students that are considered in grade level, according to Lexia Core 5, to 47%. But the other two columns, it's what's super exciting, is those kids who met usage, their usage goals, then we have 70% of our kids that have moved into the in-student grade. And we have decreased the amount of kids that are one grade level below or two grade levels below in that Lexia Core 5. So that was super exciting. Any questions about Lexia Core 5 before I move on to our next?
I can say I've seen an improvement with my own student that was doing the Lexia Core.
That's great. Yeah. Well, I love that it is so connected to what the Dyslexia Initiative for the state is expecting us to have to make sure that we're addressing all of these skills. So what it can do is really fill some of those holes. Again, it doesn't replace direct instruction, but it definitely is an intentional practice for moving our students forward. So our next instructional software was Happy Numbers. Happy Numbers is designed similarly, not quite as fancy reports that come from Happy Numbers, or as Lexia Core 5 has, but it definitely is designed to have a progression of skills. So again, it places students and it puts them where they should be as far as the skills that they are missing, and it does not let them go on unless they have mastered that skill. So it will pop them back to give them feedback and give them reteaching until they understand what that concept is. It starts them at a concrete level and moves them through abstract on those content skills. So we have, again, usage. The data is compiled. We've had 71% of our students made progress from when they started at the beginning of the year until the mid-year assessment. Now you might think, okay, well, 71%, of course we want more. However, some of those 71% students took their assessment at home in the fall. And we did have a few of our teachers, once they came back to school, had replaced them because some of them maybe had some help, because they were definitely much higher than what they were showing in the classroom. So the teachers were able to readjust that to make sure that it was appropriate for them. So some of the data that we've seen from that is we had one second grade class, different second grade class than the one I talked about before, who has intentionally been using Happy Numbers. Her students also increased in numbers and operations, 1 to 3 RIP bands from fall to winter. And then kindergarten, Fastbridge, we had one teacher who decreased her numbers in the high risk from 27% to 13% in math. And then also we had one who increased her that low area, the kids who are basically benchmarking, from 57% to 71%. So we're seeing some great gains with this. We have also kind of changed to where we were giving our 3rd through 5th grade teachers just an opportunity to use it as an intervention. Now we're encouraging them that if their students are scoring below benchmark on Fastbridge or on MAP, that they should be using Happy Numbers more so than IXL. Doesn't mean they can't use IXL, but it's definitely more, Happy Numbers is a little bit better of an intervention versus IXL. So we've encouraged them to use that. Any questions about Happy Numbers?
I have a question. I think that would apply for the both of them. Is how often are you wanting these to be used, or?
Well, both of them have a recommended usage of minutes. So the teachers have determined when a good time to be able to use those. Some of them, for most of them, Lexia Core 5, they'll use during their guided reading time, their small group time. So when they're meeting with students in groups, that's one of the stations that they would have to be able to use that Lexia Core 5 would be during that station time. For Happy Numbers, sometimes they'll start their math time before they move on to their lesson. They'll start everybody in Happy Numbers. But then also sometimes there's also work at home, where kids are doing that work at home too.
So would that be like every day or 2 times a week, or what would you if you were?
If they're meeting their usage goals, typically it's about 15 minutes a day that students would be spending on either one of them. I would say, if I had to guess, I would say teachers probably are doing, probably not every day, it's probably more to 3 or 4 days a week. But the ones that are using it intentionally are making it part of their routine.
Okay, and that was actually my next question. is it being consistent throughout the district, or is it just up to the teacher to decide, or how is that?
Well, it's encouraged to be consistent, and because of the data that we're sharing weekly with the principals, it is becoming more consistent. You're seeing a larger amount of teachers whose students are actually meeting the usage time. Mr. Carlson has also copied off reports dropped them on teachers' desks so that they actually have that right there. If they're not getting in to look at the reports, it's kind of a reminder, hey, take a look at your child's reports and see where they're at. So our goal is, yes, to have complete consistency. Any other questions about happy numbers?
No, I think the Lexia core, though, I know with my student, like, it's so many nights a week, I think, to go with what Malia was talking about. And I don't know if, like, every teacher's that way or every student's that way. I think it's just those ones that need some intervention. And I think it's like 10 or 15 minutes
Right.
the other night of the week or something. 2 or 3 nights a week, I think is what we
Right,
do.
we've kind of allowed the teachers to be able to, now, if we don't get the usage, we may not allow the teachers to be able to just see where it works in their schedule, but allow the teachers to determine where is it working best for their students. We do expect them to be using it, but how they incorporate that, whether it's at the beginning of their math time, whether it's, a 10-minute time before, sometimes they come in from recess, they have a little bit of time before they go on to do something else.
We do some of it at home, too, during
Yeah,
the week.
right, and it is available always for at home. So then IXL, which is what we have had in the past, really can be used in 2 ways. The majority of our teachers use it because it is connected to our math, our My Math and our illustrative math. In the middle school and in the high school, CPM resources, the majority of teachers use it where it is a practice from whatever standard they're teaching in the classroom at that time. But there is a way to be able to use it as an intervention. The middle school has used it in the past. When I talked with them about this, they have not used it this year in this way, but that there is a learning path that, again, IXL places them into a learning path based on their placement test. And then what they would do is recommend that they do 15 problems each time they get into IXL or each day on their learning path before moving into the practice of whatever standard they may have been assigned by their teacher. So those teachers who use this very intentionally, we have a 3rd grade teacher who's used this for a couple of years, and definitely the last few years we have seen that progress in her classroom. Majority of her students increased 1 to 4 RIT bands in both reading and math because she intentionally uses both of those. And the way she uses those is that it's, again, during that small group time. When she's working with students, they are working back at their desks on that. And we had a 5th grade teacher, her class, she intentionally uses IXL. She increased her students in that low risk and college pathway in Fast Bridge, 40 to 51% of her students. And this is used all levels. The other 2 were only at elementary, Lexia Core 5 and Happy Numbers. So then Newsella is this one is brand new this year. There have been some teachers that have used it in the past, but as a district, this is new for our 6-12 schools. At this point, the majority of our teachers that are using it within their core content, but there is the ability to be able to differentiate with that. We do have some SPED teachers using it that are focusing on content, comprehension, and then fluency, and they are able to use this. This is basically articles. They're real-world articles. They're actual articles, so it's high-interest, nonfiction articles for students to be able to read. A teacher can choose an article and can place it at 5 different Lexile levels, which a Lexile level is a level of their reading ability. And so it helps to differentiate within a classroom. Some of our science teachers are using it and our social studies, so it's not just ELA, that they can assign those articles. Students can annotate on them. There's a lot of digital tools that go along with it to be able to work on some vocabulary and comprehension skills. So Mrs. Hauer and Mrs. Peoples have been kind of they've been the supportive coaches at both of their buildings, and I know that they have done a lot of professional development with their teachers too to try to increase the usage of Newsella. Any questions about that? Okay, so this I just put together as we've started having conversations about what our interventions might look like. And the first thing we need to make sure we would want to do is be systematic about the resources that we are using, so that there's not just people pulling from wherever to be able to address an intervention need. So we would want to develop a systematic process that's data-driven, which we basically already have for reading. We just need to make sure we're doing that also for math. So K1 would be using FastBridge as their data to determine the groups or the needs of students. 2 through 5 would use FastBridge and possibly math. And the reason I say that is FastBridge, we would want those specific skills. But if there are kids who are on or above level, we can use MAP scores to be able to determine what skills might they, even though they may be scored at benchmark, there could be some specific skills that they could be working on also during an intervention time. And then 6-12, typically, they kind of reverse it. They start with MAP, and they look at those kids who are scoring below the 40th percentile, and then they would use FastBridge to pinpoint those skills specifically for those students. So that's kind of how we would determine our groups or who would be receiving interventions based on the results for specific skills. So our reading resources, the areas we would address are there, and those go right along with what we teach within our core instruction. Math resources the same way, and all 4 of those are what, for instance, MAP, you are tested on in MAP. So those are the 4 areas of strands that we teach in math. Right now we have, I've listed the happy numbers, the IXL. The MAP learning continuum is what I was talking about, that with MAP it breaks it up into specific skills. And that learning continuum, we can see where it's specific skills those kids might be deficit in. So we don't have a specific plan in place yet, and that is something that we've already been discussing, but we'd like to be able to develop a systematic plan that maybe could have a flow chart for ease and consistency, so we can make sure everybody is very consistent in how we would be providing interventions. And that for math, we are continuing, Mrs. Fanning and I have been looking at a lot of math resources that are similar to like Lexia Core 5, or 95% group, which I'll talk about in a minute, but in the math world. So this is, again, not our specific plan, but kind of gives you an idea of what we would be considering as part of our plan. And then finally, the 95% group are some resources. That's the name of the company. We have, Mrs. Fanning and I have looked very closely. Actually, I've looked at this for a couple of years with our title teachers. And it's definitely a set of materials that connects to the dyslexia initiative for reading, so it really covers all of those specific skills that we need to make sure we have within our core instruction. But we are looking at it, if we were to purchase this as a possibility, that this would be part of title and SPED. Our SPED materials need to be updated for addressing these specific skills, and then our title teachers, these are the areas that our title teachers most readily support. There's one area that would be for core classroom, those phonics chip kits. What that is those are actually manipulatives for teaching phonics. So it's not that it's replacing Fountas and Pinnell Classroom by any means. Fountas and Pinnell Classroom is the what we teach. These would be adding to the how we teach. And the reason we felt like it was important for our classroom teachers to have this piece is because if students are receiving interventions with title teachers or with their SPED teachers, they need to be having the same types of supports in their core Tier 1 classroom, their core instruction, and using the same type of language. So that's how we would connect all of those together. They have a couple of materials for vocabulary and comprehension that would be used with title and middle school interventions. We would purchase one as so that the middle school teachers would be able to, when they're providing intervention, have something to draw off of. There's professional development involved in this, and there's the PSI school license. Basically, there are some lesson libraries for our title and SPED teachers, and that would is like a placement test to know which skills those kids are missing. Now that we could We have the QPS, we have the past, so if we needed to cut somewhere, that would be a place we could cut, because I feel like we have some other pieces that we might be able to determine where those kids would be able to fall in those lesson libraries. So why would we look at these? It addresses our phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary comprehension. It strengthens our MTSS intervention process. The cost of the material, it's a one-time purchase. This is not something that is that we have to do every year, because it is truly for the teachers in how to teach these specific skills. So it's not like workbooks. And so the total cost, you can see there, we've split it out with what the general education would be, and then what SPED dollars, because of what portions would be for our SPED students, and then what the professional development would be and what the total cost would be.
We can use ESSER 1 funds, both for gen ed and special ed, to purchase this and not have it impact our normal operating budget in any way.
So any questions about the 95% group resources? Yes.
So, would this replace, and you may have answered it, but I was listening, because I was trying to read at the same time. Would this 95% group replace any of the other interventions that we have? I'm just curious how you talked earlier, like we have a systematic process and streamlining, or are we just adding another tool, so to speak?
Our SPED does not have the materials that they would need for this. What our title has at this point, they have some things that were purchased whenever our last MTSS was it 10 years ago? Some of those materials may still be able to be used, but a lot of them are outdated. And so this would be updating specifically for phonemic awareness and phonics. And then those few pieces would be the vocabulary and comprehension.
I guess I should have clarified. I was just making sure we weren't adding another intervention
No.
tool to the
wanna say
ones we're
something?
already using.
Yep.
So that way we could be more streamlined.
And that's the.
That way everybody
expectation.
knows, when you're talking, getting into that systematic plan, everybody knows, all right, this is our step. We have a rubric now, and this is how we address this.
Right.
So when we hired Mrs. Fanning, one of the things we tasked her with was really looking at our special ed curriculum and the resources that were being used. What she found were that many of the resources we couldn't purchase updates of them because they no longer make them. Some of the materials like SRA are still considered good materials but don't fit with the MTSS process the way we're using them. And so we've been looking for some time for a good intervention that we could use as our primary intervention at multiple grade levels, and we believe pretty strongly that this would do that and would allow us to look at the other materials we have and to give them specific purposes, but not to use them consistently like we are right now. Does that answer your question, Chris?
Yeah, I was just making sure like we weren't adding
Our
another.
our goal is that we get very specific about it. It's hard to just say you can only use this one resource, because every kiddo has a little bit different
Yeah.
need.
Everybody fits the same shape.
We need to narrow the focus.
But yes.
Not have 20, which is.
Yes.
That's what I was getting at.
And then we need to gather all of the things that we're not using, and we can put them, put them away.
I think Carol has a question.
I think it's great that you did this report. As I was looking at it, preparing for the meeting, that I remember when we voted on some of this stuff, some of it we've had like IXL for a longer time, some's brand new, so it's interesting to see, what we're integrating and the results from that. It's interesting that you dialed down into a couple classrooms and said, sometimes I get kind of blurry-eyed when we say the district did this, and it's really hard for me to say, what does the average, but thank you for drilling down into a couple classrooms and saying, this helps. And I think it's great that Mr. Carlson is printing off the reports and going into all the classrooms and laying them on teachers' desk. Does two things for me. One is it actually gives a teacher a resource now. They don't have to go look and dial down, and all that is right there. And then hopefully he actually catches a few teachers while he's doing this, and if they have any questions or dialogue, I think that feedback is invaluable. So I appreciate Mr. Carlson for doing that extra step and put it on the teacher's desk, because then, all they have to do is look at the data, so that's great.
And both he and Kara have met with both the grade level teams at times, if they're wanting, if they're asking for more, and then also individual teachers. So I
Very
will
good.
pass that along. They'll appreciate that.
Thank you very much for this information. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so we are moving on. Dr. Cobbs is going to give us an update on the ESSER funds, ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 specifically.
Yeah, so I wanted to apologize that it didn't get put into the agenda until this morning. I was waiting on KSDE to update us on where ESSER funds were at, and some of you heard me talking about it over here. It finally came this evening, but I wanted to make sure that our numbers were the same and were appropriate. But the information basically stays the same. I wanted to remind, and specifically after conversations from our last meeting, of what the vision of USD290 is, that every student graduates from Ottawa High School with the knowledge, skills, and behaviors toward life-sustaining employment. That is every student. And sometimes that means we've got to do different things for different students, right, to make sure that we get them there. But I think it's also important to understand the gaps and the pitfalls that we're trying to overcome. Our students, when school was closed on March 12th, then missed 38 days of school last year. We pushed back school to start an additional 17 and a half days from August 17th, I think, to September 9th. And then our elementary students were hybrid for 32 days, in which they received about 3 hours of in-person instruction a day with their teacher. Middle school was 36 days and OHS was 40 days. So certainly we have some gaps to overcome as we continue to work on making sure that we meet the vision of our district. So ESSER funds are in essence sent to districts to help us overcome that. Right, so we have ESSER 1 funds, which you're aware of. There was about $370,000 initially provided to the district in ESSER 1 funds that we are still now spending because of the volume of Spark dollars that we have. We had ESSER 1 special ed funds that we still have some of those existing too, which is part of how we would pay for 95% group if we chose to go down that path. ESSER 2 funds are almost ready for us to begin to draw down. And we are getting approximately $1.7 million of ESSER 2 funds. The reason that this presentation was waiting, again, I was waiting on KSDE, a school district predominantly through some conversations with the Kansas State Department of Education indicated that there was an equity problem, and subsequently the 10% overflow amount of dollars that the state had through ESSER funds, they indicated should go to schools who weren't getting the same per pupil dollar amount that other districts were. So as an example, Blue Valley and KCK are nearly similar in terms of their size. KCK received $37 million in ESSER 2 funds. Blue Valley received $1.4 million in ESSER funds. The size of Blue Valley received $300,000 less than Ottawa, which indicates some issue of discrepancy in terms of how dollars were allocated to districts across the state. Regardless, KSDE has now funneled some money through there, and we saw some changes existing for about 15 different school districts. We were not one of those. Our allotment stays at $1.7 million. ESSER 3 funds are still reportedly coming our way. We don't have really any idea what they're going to be. What we do know is that when they do come, they're most likely going to change the date in which we can expend those funds to, all the way out to the fall, to September of 2024, right? If we get what the original allotment was indicated to be, we'd be looking at about $4 million. This is not new information to any of you, but we'll catch everybody up. What you do need to know on how we expend these funds is that there is an oversight committee that is being created by KSDE. The purpose of this oversight committee is that they are very much aware that the increase in funds that is coming to schools is going to be scrutinized by our legislature and by a number of people quite heavily. And so they want to make sure that people aren't utilizing these dollars in a manner that is going to impact their districts down the road when we are audited and they say, nope, this didn't meet one of the 15 criteria and subsequently you got to pay this money back to the feds. So there's an oversight committee. If you're not aware of this, there was an oversight committee for our Sparks funds as well. Everything that we did through Sparks had to be approved by an outside entity before we could draw down those dollars to spend it. This isn't new for us. We can make it through this. In order for us to be able to draw down those funds, we are going to have to submit our plan to KSDE. The plan is changeable, but they are going to have to identify each thing within that plan and say, yes, this meets the criteria, or no, it doesn't meet the criteria. And subsequently, once they approve it, they will then give us access to the funds. We will have to draw down those funds as we expend them. They will not put $1.7 million into our budget. We are still going to have to draw down those amounts. So, there may still be some special education dollars that is still allotted as they go through this, as there are some hangover dollars that are still out there, but we will see how all of that works out. So the real question is, how do we want to utilize these funds? And part of the conversation that Amy was creating tonight was to show that when intervention is put in place and when the time is provided to the intervention, it has a dramatic impact upon the achievement of our students. So we want to make sure that we are identifying all of the things that we could do with these resources for us to think about as a board, how we want to allocate those dollars. So remember, ESSER II funds have to be depleted by September of 2023. That's 2 school years, right? So it would be next year at 21-22, the following year at 22-23, right? And then the following year being for ESSER III funds. So we can start working through some of those things. The additional 20 minutes has some negotiated considerations that we want to make sure that we can bring up. So first, I met with Megan O'Neill last week to begin working through some of those things, and she actually brought up a good point that I certainly want to address with the board with teachers, for teachers, is that when we looked at the daily rate of pay, we neglected 2 pieces of it. One would be additional prep time to do any type of intervention. The 2 would be additional time to disaggregate data. So when we looked at simply the daily rate of pay for 20 minutes, we really didn't take into account any additional time that they're going to have to prep, nor any additional time that they're going to have to disaggregate their data. I'm not sure that you're going to get a whole lot of time within the plan time. That piece isn't changing to give them additional plan time, or the PLC is already narrowed so much now to ask more of that, which means that we're going to actually take a look at what it would be. Currently, the value for the daily rate of pay is a 4% increase on the base pay. It's for every teacher across the board. It's 4.01%. But actually getting that up to a 5% and then recognizing there will be some other things that we have to address there. So we'll take a look and see what those dollar amounts are, but it's certainly something to consider as we have those conversations that made it past us in the first thought. The second piece would be resources and intervention programs. A lot of what Amy was just talking about this. Reading is certainly improving, but we still have a lot of room for growth. Specifically, what Chris was talking about, that we're asking parents to do some of these interventions at home. And certainly not all of our students have the ability to do them at home with their families. Not all of them have internet access to do them at home. The more that we can do that in school with licensed instructors, the better off we're going to be. Mathematics needs a lot of direction and more materials. It has not been an intervention area that we have performed well in, mostly because we've not had the time. Should we add the additional 20 minutes specifically for mathematics, we give ourselves the latitude to be able to do so. Subsequently, we need to make sure that we have the appropriate resources and systems in place to be able to do that. When we make the determination as to how this is going to go, we will put a committee together to review and determine what the interventions are, how it looks within the school day. Each building is a little bit different in what their schedules look like. To just say at 1 o'clock across the district, we're going to do this thing, puts all of our buildings at risk for a number of things. So we need to make sure that we can work within each buildings to figure out how lunch systems flow, how changes in classrooms flow, how transitions flow, all of those things. So we want to make sure that we can be able to do that, put those committees together to make sure that we have the right resources in place, the appropriate times in the school day to meet those needs. We also need to talk about personnel. Hopefully you are all aware that Garfield and Sunflower do not have full-time nurses. We have a nurse's aide who's done a great job, but she is not a nurse. We do have the opportunity with some changes in personnel and needs across our district that we can implement a full-time nurse at Garfield for the remainder of the year and into the next few years. So that's certainly something that would be beneficial given the situation that we're in, and the need for contact tracing and all the other things that typically befall upon our nurses and our administrative staff. We also want to take a look at class size. We increased our staff by 3 persons this year. Some of those may need to stay in a capacity. We still have 4th and 5th grade at Lincoln. They will be our only systems that will have over 20 students in them. 4th and 5th grade at Lincoln should be the only ones that we're going to see more than 20 students in. We will still be under many of these same restrictions next year as we start school. So again, as we have the ESSER funds to do some of these things, it certainly makes sense for us to continue that and make sure that it exists. Summer school would be another one, and summer school has not been incredibly effective at addressing learning gaps with our kids. And I think you could probably talk to any teacher that has provided summer school that a 1 or 2 hour period of the summer for 4 weeks is not going to necessarily overcome the gaps that exist over the course of learning an entire year and sometimes multiple years. But it does have a place where we can do some different things if we change the style into more of a camp style and do some things with summer school that is more about bringing kids in and doing application of knowledge and working together and building problem-solving skills and those types of things. We've had some pretty good ideas of what summer school could look like, and certainly want to begin thinking about how we might be able to do some of those things, again, using ESSER funds. And of course, the last thing on the list, maybe not the last thing as we continue to explore, would be computers, and making sure that we purchase touchscreen devices for all of our elementary levels. And this was a big conversation with our board last year as we went through this. We certainly have the ability to just wipe the slate clean now and go through this. So those were the different pieces that we've discussed in terms of utilizing ESSER funds, ESSER 2 and 3, and again, a number of those things are dependent upon ESSER 3 funds coming our way. It would be my recommendation to the board, if we only get ESSER 2 funds, that we still do an additional time to the day and we work on specific intervention. If ESSER 3 funds come and we have that much money that we need to think about distributing, we have all of these other things that would certainly be beneficial, but I don't know we would reap the benefit like we would with specified intervention, and you can see the data would support that. So I would be happy to answer any questions. There is certainly not a plan in place for this. There are a lot of things for us left to turn over, but I want to make sure that we keep the board informed of the conversations that we're having with our administrators and with our staff as we begin to work through this, try to make a decision as we move forward.
Would there be, through ESSER 3 funds, would there be, can you spend the money on like an after-school program? I'm thinking about like what the middle school used to have, that sort of is like your camp-style program
Yes.
that they used to do after school.
You certainly can, and it would certainly be something to think about. If you remember the program that we used to have at the middle school, I think it was about $40,000 a year or something like that they would get in funds to be able to do that. One of the things that we have to remember in all of this, it's one thing when we talk about hiring staff specific for these reasons, we can hire them and say, hey, look, your job is specific and it's 1 or 2 years. It's another thing when you start having conversations with families about after-school style programs and then having them go away and be able to address some of those things. It's not a reason to not do it. I'm just saying that as a unit, we're going to have to be able to address that, hey, we're going to put these things together for 2 or 3 years and probably not be able to continue them as ESSER funds are depleted.
Well, and that was the problem with the program at the
Yes.
middle school. It was funded by a grant, and the grant.
Well, and we need to recognize that the Reach for the Stars grant is up, I think, after next year, so they will be applying for another grant That'll be a consideration that we have to make should they not be awarded that grant again.
Question, I have a couple questions. So on the ESSER funds, I know way back we talked, and Dean was in on this conversation of internet access. I knew one of it was really, really difficult, and
Yep.
two, I think it was gonna be costly. Would those type of funds still be able to be spent on that if that ever became a possibility? Because, you know, we talk about some of this intervention, and if some of these families had good internet access, maybe the interventions would go better at home.
So I'll be honest with you, and Dean can jump in, or I don't think we're going to have to. There's an initiative out there, the Kansas Broadband Initiative, or I think it's what it's called. I think they're going to implement it for us.
Okay.
So they have contacted Dean again in the last month and a half or so. Had some different conversations about how we might be able to do this. I think at some point in time, they're going to look for a community to try this to see if it works in a small before they start addressing the whole. But you can hear the rumblings from our government leaders about internet being a need across the state, specifically as we start looking at the issues that have been created in a pandemic and learning. So I think you're going to see that push not have to come from schools anymore. I think you're going to see it come from the state. But yes, we can use funds for that purpose.
And I know I call it title math staff since we have title reading staff.
Yep.
But we would be able to use that type of money if we could find additional staff
Yes.
to hire for those positions, even if it is for 3 years. It's still going to help close a gap that has been created from a pandemic, even if you only get to do it for 3 years.
Yes, absolutely.
And then, would we be able to, I know we've done this maybe in years past, paid some staff, like for some of these, I guess we'll call it teams, to even get together in the summer to prep
Yeah.
for some of this. So when the rest of the staff comes in, they're ready to present
Yeah.
on PD day before school starts.
And I'm glad you brought that up because I neglected to put it up here. And I intended to put it under personnel and apparently got crazy on class size and went down to the next one. Part of what we want to accomplish with this is making sure that we shore up our core curriculum. This year and every year is tough to find time in the school year to give our staff the opportunity to really focus on what those standards are, how it impacts their day, and how they create their scope and sequence based upon it, and then ensure that it's consistent across each grade level, each building, vertically and horizontally. So we certainly want to provide the opportunity for summer sessions to come in and say, okay, look, let's take our teacher leaders throughout the district, and we have a ton of teacher leaders and a ton of people that can do this work. Really get to the bottom of our curriculum, really ensure that we've done what we've needed to do with our scope and sequence. For one, to take it out of the rotation of what needs to happen within the PLC in the following years so that we can focus on other things. But then we can just do reviews as the time needs to come. But we can be more consistent in our approach with application of that scope and sequence. But that work in the summertime would be hugely beneficial. Linda's been here for a long time and can remember when that was the only time that we used to do that work, and we used to pay people for summer programs to come in and
And I
build.
just see that with the ESSER funds, that gives us the flexibility to dive into that data, to really dissect it and see what worked, what didn't work, so that way
Yes.
we are already ready to hit the ground running, and we never affect our general budget with the ESSER funds.
You're right.
And my final question is, do you think some of these changes, depending on how this ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 all plays out, do you think some of this we could even implement by 2021 fall?
Yes. So certainly, if we were to do an intervention time, we would want it in place by the fall, and we would want it to start on day one. There is no reason why we can't do some summer school stuff with ESSER funds this summer. There's no reason why we can't do summer programs for staff this summer, including PD. I think one of the things I put in the update was that we've got some teachers that we need to go back and do some things with Fountas and Pinnell. We're going to have some math adoptions coming up. We could do some different things with them and really prepare them for the upcoming school year. We can have computers in place by the time we run it. A lot of this can happen prior to the beginning of the school year next year.
I just think it's great we're having this conversation now, because it may seem early to some, but before you know it, school's out and we haven't address things. We have to wait for teachers to come back under contract. And
Yep. I should say, we think we can have computers in place. You just never really know what's going to happen in that market.
Okay, so I was going to vote yes, even though there's no motion to vote yes on technology. I'm going to, you know this, so I mean, I'll go on my little soapbox. I'll say it positively. I think anytime we can invest in technology for our students, we should say yes. So I'm glad that technology, even though it's your last point, it's probably your most important point because you were saving it for last. So thank you for leaving it up on the screen.
I'll
so
tell
long.
myself that I did it in alphabetical order, except personnel to summer school to technology.
Yeah, there you go. You see, you're wise beyond your years. Because I do think that technology piece, having access to internet's great, but if you don't have the laptop or Chromebook to begin with, it doesn't really matter. So I echo that. Second of all, I think keeping class sizes under 20 is imperative because I think we're seeing the benefits of having smaller class sizes, that we're able to get that one-on-one instruction a little bit more every day, and I think that's going to be key. So thank you for doing that. And, I know we haven't done it yet, but I mean, keeping that as a goal to use. And then I think anything we can do for improving instructional tools and giving them more and more, like Amy was saying, we provided additional resources this year. We're looking at providing more next year. I think that ability to let our teachers be creative and say, hey, I've got several things I can do. And then the follow-up, as I said to Amy, I think having resources like you were saying, bring in people and let them see the results. Because anytime you see the data-driven outcomes, it just makes us want to do more and more. So I think it's exciting. I think keep up the good work.
We're going to do some pretty awesome things.
Yeah, I think it's great. And buy computers. So we'll vote next week. Yes.
Anyone else?
I had something to say. As far as the planning time, what would the 4% of the planning time be? Or you can get back to me later on that. I thought you would maybe just know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they have 50 minutes of plan time, so I guess if you want to look at 4% of 50 minutes, it equates to a few minutes.
15 minutes. I wasn't sure what the
Yep.
plan time was.
Yep, they have 50 minutes of plan time.
Okay, excellent. And I completely agree, with what Chris was saying about the title math staff. I was just listening to that town hall with President Biden, and he was specifically talking about the school and really getting those small groups. And he was mentioning that was like what the money is for and how it's so effective. And so I really think that we need to look at that and really focus on, quality versus quantity and not just laser beam in on adding that time when Mrs. Bybee has, sorry, I can't breathe, has talked about all the things that we have that are working, but we haven't streamlined consistently through the district to get those same results everywhere. So I think that we really should focus on that, because I know some teachers are obviously using it, and some teachers are, using time like for spelling tests instead of these other things. There's a lot of inconsistency through the district. So I think that if we really focused on making sure that we're using quality versus quantity, I think we'll see a lot of improvement in that gap. And I had mentioned after-school programs to you before, like what Linda, I didn't know about that specific one you were talking about, but I think that would be a good place that we could target a lot of our students too.
Is that the one Mr. Circle ran?
Yes.
Yep.
And I liked it because there was a lot of hands-on stuff. Kids sit at a computer a lot during the day, and this was a lot of hands-on things.
All right, anyone else have any comments, questions? All right, thank you very much for that. Okay, we are moving on. We need to talk a little bit about preparing for our superintendent evaluation. What I'd like to do is start working on that at our next session, which will be March 8th. You all will be receiving in your email from Dr. Cobbs this week the evaluation tool. If you can, go ahead and fill that out and get that back to me by March 5th, which is that Friday before. I can go ahead and compile that information so we're not spending time during that time with writing it and putting things together. Then we can go through it and talk about it and come up with our final evaluation. I would like to propose that we meet a little early for a special session at 6 o'clock and work through that then, as opposed to just pulling out into executive session and kind of feeling like we don't have the time that we really want to spend on that. And at that point, when we're through, if we feel like we have more that we need to accomplish, we can certainly do another session as well. But if that is coming early to that next session on the 8th.
Give me
something
date and
that's
time again. I was right.
March 8th, and I was thinking 6 o'clock,
Okay.
if that would work,
I have a commitment then that day.
that day, so you're not going to be at that meeting on?
No, I will be
You'll be at the
here,
meeting, but
not
you
till
can't come
7. I
early.
should be on time.
Okay, all right.
Well, send your notes in early then. Yeah.
Absolutely. Would you like us to find a different date that would work for you?
Could we still do it that night during an executive? Is that possible, or?
Well, we can. We would just have to plan on being here later that
It's
night.
what everybody else wants.
What would you
I'm-
guys want to meet at 7 and go ahead and do that first, hour as work time and then go into our meeting after that?
I'm okay with that. I mean, I'd like everybody here, so
I
that
would
be.
too, yeah.
Do we have a lot on the 8th to do, besides vote for
Well, we
computers?
can make sure that there's not a whole lot on the
We can-
8th.
We can amend we can make sure that the agenda fits the needs of the night, unless something specifically pops up that we have to
Computers.
address. Yeah.
Yeah, put the
We'll get
computers
computers on there. We'll put them on consent, so we don't even
Yeah,
have to.
there you go. Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you, Dean, in advance. We appreciate that.
Okay, so then we'll just go ahead and have our meeting at our regular time at 7 and spend that first part going through that evaluation and then proceed with our meeting.
Okay.
Sounds
All
good.
right? And Dr. Cobbs, I'll be in touch with you about what to send out and when. All right, so last thing here on this presentation part is we have the latest gating metrics, which you all have seen.
Yeah.
anything
So
you'd like to mention on
just
that?
wanted to show you where we're at with this, and you also have the piece that's in the executive file that would be indicative of where our buildings are at. But you're beginning to see it come back to green, right? So you can see up here, so this is your trend and incident rate, right? So we continue to see that decline, and we're back under 100 from last week and down to about 3.89%. Hospital beds have stayed pretty consistent. This number, just remember, 2.7 was the first really cold day we had when a lot of people thought we should have had a snow day. And so our attendance data certainly is subjective to the parents who decided to keep their kids home on that day. But there's no reason why our attendance shouldn't be 96.8 or 97 or whatever it is, and it's remained consistent. So you can see that it's coming back to green and coming back to where we're in a good spot. I think it is important and imperative for us to remember that as we come back to green, it is not necessarily a time to become more lax with our protocols. That this is really the time we need to remain true to the protocols so that we don't get ourselves back to yellow, orange, and red. So we'll continue to work through that. That'll continue to be the message for our staff. We have safe places. We continue to work with our county health department with every decision that we make to make sure that they would stand behind those decisions, including parent-teacher conferences, including what we're doing for prom, including what we're doing for sports, all of those things. So we just want to make sure that as we continue to see those gating criteria numbers come down, that we know that as we go through the end of the year that we're going to remain diligent with those protocols until somebody from that's much smarter than us in the world of medicine tells us that we no longer have to do them. And then we'll go from there.
Well, and according to Dr. Fauci tonight on the national news, it sounds like these protocols are going to be in place for a year, another year.
I will not make public comments on what I think school will look like next year to make sure that I save us from any consternation that may come from our public. We'll address those concerns when we get ready to start school next year.
But I am glad we're keeping our class sizes small.
Yep.
That's a good thing.
Yep.
All right, thank you, Dr. Cobbs. You all have been presented a personnel report. Would somebody like to make a motion to approve said report?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes 6-0, and we are down to announcements.
I think one more time, we need to congratulate Dalton Wydell and our wrestlers, boys and girls. We had 2 girls going to state wrestling this weekend, 5 boys going to state wrestling this weekend. What an incredible season they've had, to go from maybe not being able to have a season to being undefeated in dual matches over the course of the season, and now sending the volume of kids to the state tournament that we're sending. Congratulations and kudos to them. Incredible story. This week we have ACT and work keys taking place within the building at OHS. It'll be fun to see how our students do on those things, but this is the free test that all students, all juniors are going to take. So we're looking forward to that. If you didn't know, we're only 13 days away from spring break. Typically we would be saying we're 13 days to the end of the quarter, but remember that everything got pushed back and the quarter is actually 2 weeks after spring break. I'm sure, as you all prepare for your spring breaks, that there will be somebody that is frustrated by the volume of work that students are expected to do over spring break, just like they were over Christmas break. I would tell you that as we live and learn in this process, this is one more reason why we've always tried to make sure that those quarters and semesters end at those breaks, so that there really is no reason for our students to continue to do work over that time and can actually get a break and do the things that we need to do. So those are our announcements. I got nothing else.
I would like to say, if anybody has not seen how excited Coach Wydell for his kids, there's a picture of him on social media that he is.
He had to
quite the
jump like 4
vertical-
feet in the air.
How did he get that high off the ground?
Vertical, like he is just as excited as the kid on the mat, and wow.
Yes, pretty awesome. They've done an amazing job, and super proud of Coach Wydell and all of our kids, our parents. I hope they enjoy the trip to Salina. They have earned it.
Yep.
And I'm glad that that Salina is open to parents being able to go. That's not happening in all of the venues. So we'll cross our fingers that continues to be the case as they approach Friday and Saturday for our boys and girls.
Very good.
And a thank you to all of our wrestling coaches.
there we
too.
go.
There it is.
All right. Is there a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes 6-0.